Nobody expected it. Not the generals, not the scientists, not the world leaders sitting in their emergency bunkers watching every second on live feed. Not even him. Marcus Webb was just a regular guy from Birmingham, England. He worked a normal job. He paid his bills. He drank his tea every morning and complained about the weather like every other person on his street. But on one Tuesday morning in October, everything changed. Not just for Marcus, for every single human being alive on planet Earth. The sky turned purple over London first, then New York, then Tokyo, then every city, every village, every tiny corner of this planet watched as something enormous descended from the clouds. Something that moved with purpose. Something that was clearly not from here. The ships were massive, beautiful in a terrifying way, like floating cities made of crystal and dark metal. They hummed with a sound that people said they felt in their chest more than heard with their ears. Millions of people ran. Billions more stood completely still and stared upward with their mouths open. Every military on Earth went on full alert within minutes. Every government called every other government. Every news channel in every language cut to live coverage. And then the largest ship descended lower than the rest. It moved slowly over central London. It blocked out the sun, and from its base, a beam of soft golden light touched the ground in the middle of a public park. Inside that light stood a woman. No, not a woman. A queen. She was tall. Her skin was a deep, rich shade of crimson red. Her hair was long and dark as space itself. Her eyes glowed with a soft violet light that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. She wore armor that looked like it was made from the bones of stars. And on her head sat a crown that made every human crown ever made look like a toy. She stood there, calm, powerful, completely unafraid. Around her, her guards formed a perfect circle. 12 of them, each one taller than any human man. Each one holding weapons that nobody on Earth could identify or understand. She looked at the crowd that had gathered at a terrified distance. And then she spoke. Her voice carried across the park without any microphone, without any device. It simply moved through the air and landed inside every ear clearly. She said she had come to choose. She said her kind had watched humanity for 300 years. They had studied every war, every kindness, every failure, every moment of unexpected courage from unexpected people. She said today was the day she made her selection. She said she needed one human, one specific human, someone her people had already identified, someone they had been watching very closely. She said this human would come with her. She said this was not a request. The world held its breath. And then she said a name. Marcus Webb, a maintenance worker from Birmingham, who had absolutely no idea why the most powerful being he had ever seen was standing in a London park saying his name out loud. But here is where the story gets truly extraordinary. Here is where everything the world thought it knew got turned completely upside down. 3 things happened after she said his name that shocked every human alive. The first thing shook every government on Earth to its foundation. The second thing made scientists completely abandon everything they believed about the universe. And the third thing made billions of people cry without fully understanding why. This is that story. Let me show you exactly how this happened. Marcus Webb woke up that Tuesday morning the same way he woke up every morning. His alarm went off at 6:15. He hit the snooze button once. Then again. Then he finally sat up on the edge of his bed in his small flat in Handsworth, Birmingham, and stared at the carpet for about 30 seconds like it had personally offended him. He was 34 years old, medium height, average build, brown hair that needed a cut about 3 weeks ago. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow from a bicycle accident when he was 9. He liked football, hated mornings, and made his tea far too strong for most people's taste. His neighbors would tell you he was quiet but kind. His coworkers would tell you he always remembered birthdays and never forgot to hold a door open. His supervisor at the facilities management company where he worked would tell you he was reliable and never caused any problems. Nobody in Marcus's life would have used the word extraordinary to describe him. That was the whole point. He made his tea. He ate 2 pieces of toast with butter. He checked his phone and saw 17 missed news alerts about something happening in the sky over different cities. But he silenced the notifications because he was already running 4 minutes late and needed to catch the bus. He didn't look up at the sky when he walked to the bus stop. He had his headphones inches. He was listening to a podcast about the history of Birmingham's industrial canals, because that was the kind of thing Marcus found genuinely interesting, even though most people found it deeply boring. He got on the bus. He sat in his usual seat near the back. And that is when the bus driver stopped the bus completely in the middle of the road and stood up and pointed out the front window and said something in a voice that Marcus had never heard a grown adult use before. It was the voice of someone whose brain had just stopped working properly because reality had exceeded every limit they had ever imagined. Marcus pulled out one earbud. He looked out the front window of the bus. Above Birmingham, in the gray October sky, 3 enormous ships hung in the air like impossible mountains that had decided gravity was optional. They were so big that Marcus's brain initially refused to process them as real objects. His mind kept trying to convince him they were clouds, or buildings, or some kind of optical illusion. But they were not clouds. They moved, slowly, deliberately, and they hummed. Everyone on the bus was either screaming or completely silent. There seemed to be no middle ground. Marcus fell into the completely silent category. He simply stood up from his seat, walked to the front of the bus, stepped off through the open door because the driver had forgotten to close it, and stood on the pavement looking up. His tea thermos was still in his hand. Around him, the street had become chaos. Cars stopped. People ran in different directions. Someone nearby was crying loudly. Someone else was on the phone shouting. A woman across the road had dropped all her shopping and was just standing completely still with her hands over her mouth. Marcus stood and looked up and felt something very strange. He did not feel afraid. He felt something much harder to describe. Something that lived somewhere between wonder and recognition. Like seeing a face you know from a dream but cannot quite place. Like hearing a song that you have never heard before, but that somehow feels familiar in a deep and inexplicable way. His phone buzzed. It was his supervisor calling. He didn't answer. It buzzed again. It was his friend Jonah. He didn't answer that either. He just watched the sky. The ships did not do anything aggressive. They did not fire weapons. They did not send out smaller craft. They simply existed above the city with a kind of calm authority that somehow made every human military response feel completely pointless, even before anyone tried anything. Later, people would report that every weapons system on Earth seemed to go completely offline the moment the ships appeared. Missiles would not arm. Jets lost power and had to land. Even personal weapons seemed to stop functioning properly. Not violently. Not dramatically. They simply stopped working, the way a car stops when you run out of petrol. Marcus did not know any of that yet. He was still standing on the pavement in Birmingham, looking up when his phone buzzed a 3rd time. This time it was a number he did not recognize. He looked at it. Area code he had never seen. Long number. Looked almost like an international number, but with too many digits. He answered it. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then a voice spoke. It was calm and clear, and had an accent that Marcus could not identify. Not quite British, not quite American, something else entirely. Something that felt like it existed slightly outside the range of anything he had heard before. The voice said his full name, Marcus Daniel Webb. Marcus said yes, that was him, and who was this, please? The voice said that it was not possible to explain fully in this moment, but that he needed to travel to London immediately. To Hyde Park specifically. That transport was being arranged for him. That a car would be outside in approximately 4 minutes. Marcus said that was absolutely not something he was going to do because there were massive alien ships hovering over the city, and he was fairly certain getting in a stranger's car was not the recommended response. The voice said he understood. Then the voice said something that Marcus later told investigators was the most unsettling part of the entire conversation. The voice said, "We know about the canal. We know what you did that night in 2019. And that is exactly why she chose you." Marcus went completely still. His face changed, just slightly, in a way that someone watching closely would have noticed. Because the canal the voice was referring to was something Marcus had never told anyone about. Not his friends, not his family, not anyone. It was something that happened late on a winter night when nobody was watching, and there was no reason for anyone to ever know. Something that Marcus had done simply because it was the right thing to do, and not because anyone would ever see it or praise him for it, or give him anything in return. He had pulled a stranger out of the water, a man who had fallen inches, a man who was drowning quietly in the dark where nobody else had noticed. Marcus had gone in after him without thinking, without hesitating, in freezing water in December at 2 in the morning. He had pulled the man out, made sure he was breathing, called an ambulance, and then walked home soaking wet and told nobody. Not because he was embarrassed, but because it simply did not occur to him that it was the kind of thing you told people about. It was just something that needed doing, and so he did it. He had not thought about it in years. The car arrived in 4 minutes exactly. Marcus got in. The driver did not speak. The driver wore dark glasses and did not seem entirely human, but Marcus decided not to examine that too closely because he already had quite enough to deal with. They drove south, toward London. The motorway was chaos. People were stopped on the hard shoulder looking at the sky. Police vehicles were everywhere, but seemed uncertain of what they were actually supposed to be doing. Military helicopters flew overhead in tight formations. Marcus sat in the back seat and drank the rest of his tea because it was still in his hand, and he was honestly not sure what else to do with it. 3 hours later, the car entered London through roads that had been cleared by something. Not by police, by something else. A presence that Marcus could feel but not see. Like a path being made through crowd by someone very large and very calm walking very purposefully. They stopped at the edge of Hyde Park. Marcus got out. He could see her from here. Across the park, surrounded by her guards, standing in that golden light like something painted into existence by an artist who had never been afraid of anything, was the alien queen. And even from this distance, Marcus could tell something that made no logical sense at all. She was already looking directly at him. Not at the crowd, not at the cameras, not at the ring of military personnel who had formed a perimeter at a very respectful distance. At him, Marcus Webb, with his too-strong tea and his 3-week-old haircut and his podcast about Birmingham canals. He took one step forward into the park, and the world watched. The grass felt strange under Marcus's feet as he walked toward her. Not strange in a bad way, just different, like the ground itself was slightly more real than it usually was. Like every blade of grass was exactly where it was supposed to be, and had been waiting there for a very specific reason. Around him, At a distance, thousands of people watched in absolute silence, the kind of silence that fills a space so completely that you become aware of sounds you normally never notice. A bird somewhere, wind moving through leaves, the distant hum of those enormous ships above the city. Cameras from every news organization in the world were pointed at Marcus. Satellites repositioned themselves. Billions of people on every continent watched a 34-year-old maintenance worker from Birmingham walk alone across a park toward the most powerful being any human had ever encountered. Military snipers on rooftops watched through scopes and had absolutely no idea what they were supposed to do. Government officials in emergency bunkers typed frantic messages to each other and received no useful answers. Scientists in laboratories watching the live feed argued with each other in 6 different languages about what was actually happening. Marcus just walked. He was not brave in the way that action heroes in films are brave. He was not striding forward with his jaw set and his chest out and his eyes blazing with determination. He was walking the way he walked to the bus stop every morning. Steady, ordinary, present. That ordinariness, several people later said, was the most extraordinary thing about the entire moment. When he got within 20 meters of her, 2 of her guards stepped forward. They were enormous. Their skin was the color of deep ocean water. Their eyes were solid gold with no pupils. They held their weapons across their bodies in a posture that was clearly not aggressive, but was absolutely a statement. Marcus stopped. He looked at the guards. Then he looked past them at the Queen. She raised one hand slightly. Just a small gesture. Almost casual. The guards stepped back. She looked at Marcus with those glowing violet eyes, and she tilted her head very slightly, the way someone does when they are seeing something they were told about but are still surprised by in person. She spoke. Her voice was the same voice he had felt in his chest from across the park, clear and layered in a way that sounded like more than one person speaking perfectly in unison, while also somehow being one singular voice. She said his name the way the voice on the phone had said it. Marcus Daniel Webb. Like it meant something specific. Like it was a word in a language he didn't speak yet. She said, "You are smaller than I expected." Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "You are taller than I expected." Something shifted on her face. The faintest change. The ghost of something that was not quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. She said, "Are you afraid?" Marcus thought about this for what seemed to the watching world like a very long time, but was actually about 4 seconds. He said, "Yes, but that seems like the reasonable response to this situation, so I'm not going to apologize for it." Behind her, among her guards, something happened. A subtle movement, almost like a ripple of surprise passing through them. Like they had expected something different and had not received it and were recalibrating. The Queen studied him. She said, "My people have watched your planet for 300 years. We have observed thousands of humans in situations of pressure and uncertainty. The vast majority perform in one of 2 ways. They become aggressive from fear, or they become dishonest from self-preservation." She paused. She said, "You did neither. You told the truth about your fear, and then immediately demonstrated that the fear would not control your behavior. This is why you are here." Marcus processed this. He said, "What exactly does here mean? In the larger sense?" She said, "That is what I am about to explain." And she did. What she told Marcus over the next 30 minutes, while the world watched in silence, was something that every government, every military, and every intelligence agency on Earth had desperately wanted to know for decades. Her people were called the Varan. They were ancient, not in the way humans use that word to mean old buildings or ancient history. Ancient in the way stars are ancient. Their civilization had existed for longer than Earth's sun had been burning. They had visited many worlds, many civilizations at different stages of development. Some of those civilizations they had watched and left alone. Some they had helped. A few they had been forced to prevent from destroying themselves and others. Earth was special, she said, not because humans were the most intelligent species they had encountered, not because human technology was impressive by any standard they measured, not because human culture or art or science had reached any particular milestone they required. Earth was special because of something much harder to measure. She called it the capacity for chosen sacrifice. She said that among all the civilizations her people had studied, human beings had one behavior that appeared more frequently and more consistently than any other species had ever demonstrated. The behavior of choosing to help at personal cost when there was absolutely no benefit to the individual, when no one was watching, when nothing was to be gained, when the logical response from a survival standpoint was to do nothing. She said her people had been searching for this quality for a very long time. Not because it was rare in the universe, but because what they needed to face was coming. Something that would require this quality in a partner civilization. And Earth, she said, was the only world they had found where it was consistent enough, widespread enough, strong enough. Marcus listened to all of this. Then he said, "And you want me specifically because of the canal?" She said, "We want you specifically because the canal was not the first time, or the 5th, or the 15th. We have been watching you for 11 years. Marcus Webb, you simply do things because they are right to do. Consistently, quietly, without record or reward. You are the clearest example of the thing we need in its most natural form." Marcus stood in the golden light of a being who had crossed the universe to find the most ordinary, extraordinary person on the planet. And he felt the weight of something he did not yet fully understand settling onto his shoulders. He said, "What exactly is it that is coming?" The Queen looked at him, and the 30 seconds that passed before she answered were 30 seconds that Marcus would describe years later as the most terrifying and most important 30 seconds of his entire life. Her name was Ethan. Not the Queen's title. Her actual name. She told it to Marcus on their 3rd day together, which was also the 3rd day that the world's governments had been attempting every form of diplomatic, military, and technological approach they could think of to either communicate with or, somehow, gain leverage over the Varen ships. None of it worked. Not because the Varen were hostile, but because they were simply not interested in negotiating with governments. They had made their selection. They had their representative. Every conversation about the situation on Earth's future would go through Marcus, and only Marcus, until the situation was resolved. This caused an immediate and spectacular diplomatic crisis across every nation on Earth. Marcus learned about it from a tablet that Ethan's people gave him. They had configured it to pull news feeds from around the world. He spent about an hour on the morning of day 3 reading headlines from different countries and getting a very clear picture of exactly how many powerful people were extremely upset that an ordinary maintenance worker from Birmingham was the sole representative of their entire species. Then he ate breakfast. The food on the ship was not what he expected. It was not unpleasant. It was simply unfamiliar. Colors and textures that did not correspond to anything he had eaten before. He found 2 things he genuinely liked. One tasted loosely like something between a pear and warm bread. The other he could not describe at all, but looked forward to every morning. His quarters on the ship were simple. Ethan's people had studied human living spaces carefully and created something that was functional and comfortable without being an imitation of something Earth made. He had a bed that was slightly larger than his bed at home, a window that showed either the sky or space, depending on whether the ship had moved, and a desk with the tablet. On the morning of day 3, Ethan came to find him herself. This was apparently unusual enough that two of her guards exchanged a glance when she walked past them toward Marcus's quarters, rather than sending a message through the communication system. The guards said nothing, but the glance was noticed. She knocked. This also, Marcus would later learn, was unusual. Varen of her rank did not knock. Doors simply opened when they approached. The fact that she knocked meant she had chosen to knock, had deliberately adopted a human custom for his comfort. He opened the door. She was not wearing her full armor. She wore something simpler, still formal by any human standard, still clearly the clothing of someone of enormous importance, but less armored, less ceremonial. She looked different this way, still completely commanding, still the most physically striking person he had ever seen in any category, but slightly more approachable, slightly more present in the room rather than above it. She said, "May I come in?" He stepped back and gestured inside. She entered and stood near the window. Below them, London was visible, small and gray and ordinary, and beautiful in the way cities are beautiful when seen from above. She said, "I want to tell you what is coming. Not the version I would tell a committee of your world leaders. The true version." Marcus sat on the edge of his bed. He folded his hands in his lap. He looked at her and waited. She told him about the Kreth. They were not like the Varen. They were not like humans. They did not observe. They did not study. They consumed. That was the most accurate word she could find in his language. They moved through the universe, and they consumed everything in their path. Not out of hunger, not out of malice exactly, but out of a fundamental nature that had no off-position, and no mercy, and no capacity for the thing that Ethan had just spent 3 days explaining she valued most. The Varen had been holding a boundary against the Kreth for longer than Earth had existed as a planet. But boundaries required something to hold them, and the Varen had been holding theirs alone for too long. They were not weakening. They were not afraid. But the boundary itself required a particular kind of energy to maintain. A resonance that the Varen, for reasons she tried to explain in several different ways, and Marcus understood only partially, could no longer generate sufficiently on their own. They needed a partner civilization. A civilization whose fundamental nature resonated at the same frequency as the one that powered the boundary. The frequency of chosen sacrifice. Earth was that civilization. Marcus let this sit for a long moment. Then he said, "What does partnering with you actually involve?" "In practical terms," she said, "in practical terms, your world would be connected to ours. Protected, given access to knowledge and technology that would end most of your current suffering and most of your most serious threats. In return, selection of humans would come and learn and contribute to the maintenance of the boundary. Not as soldiers, not as servants, as genuine partners." He said, "And what happens to Earth if we say no?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The Kreth are 12 years from the edge of the barrier zone. Your solar system sits behind. If the boundary holds, they will never reach you. If it does not hold, and they do reach you, the result will not be an invasion in the way your histories record invasions. It will be considerably more final than that." Marcus looked out the window at London below. He said, "Why are you telling me this? You're the queen of an ancient civilization. You could negotiate this with every government on Earth simultaneously. You have technology we cannot match. You could simply require this rather than request it." Ethan turned and looked at him directly. She said, "Because that approach would produce formal agreement built on fear and imbalance. And an agreement built on fear does not resonate at the right frequency. It produces the wrong energy entirely. We need genuine partnership. Genuinely chosen. Not compelled." She paused. She said, and because I have been watching your world for a very long time. And the thing I have learned about humans is that when you choose something freely and truly, there is nothing in the universe more powerful than that choice. Marcus was quiet. Then he said, "Give me a week. I need to talk to some people." She looked at him with those violet eyes. She said, "You want to talk to ordinary people, not governments." He said, "Governments will decide what is best for them. I want to know what the people think." Something moved across her face again. That same ghost of something in the neighborhood of a smile. She said, 7 days. Marcus spent those 7 days doing something that no diplomat, no general, and no world leader expected. He went home. Not to his flat exactly. The area around his building had become a media circus of proportions that were genuinely impressive, even by the standards of a week that had already included humanity's first confirmed contact with an alien civilization. But he went to Birmingham. He asked Ethan's people to take him back to the city in a way that allowed him to move around without being immediately surrounded. They agreed. They were capable of making this happen in ways Marcus did not fully understand and decided not to examine too carefully. He walked through his neighborhood. He went to the corner shop where he bought his milk and his biscuits, and the woman behind the counter who had served him for 6 years looked at him with enormous eyes and said, "Marcus, is that you? Are you all right?" He said he was all right and bought a packet of digestive biscuits and asked how her son's football team was doing. He went to the community center 3 streets over where he had volunteered on Thursday evenings for 4 years, teaching basic digital skills to elderly residents who wanted to learn how to video call their grandchildren. His class was not meeting because of obvious reasons, but several of the regulars were there anyway, because they were elderly and lived alone, and found the community center comforting. He sat with them. He drank terrible instant coffee from a polystyrene cup. He told them, honestly and in plain language, what Ethan had told him. He did not dress it up. He did not make it sound more dramatic than it was. He did not make it sound less serious either. Then he asked them what they thought. An 81-year-old woman named Edna, who had been coming to his Thursday class for 3 years, and who had recently learned to use video calling to talk to her daughter in Canada, looked at him over her cup of terrible coffee and said, "Well, Marcus, love, it sounds like the same question people have always had to answer, doesn't it? Do you look after yourself, or do you look after each other?" Marcus looked at her. She said, "We've always answered it both ways. Humans have. But the best of us have always known which answer is right." Marcus wrote that down in a small notebook he had in his jacket pocket. He spent the next 6 days doing versions of this same thing. Talking to people. Not important people. Not influential people. Bus drivers and teachers and construction workers, and students and shopkeepers and parents and grandparents and teenagers who found him in parks or cafes or community spaces. He asked them all the same question. If keeping the universe safe required you to contribute something real, something you would genuinely give up or genuinely work for, freely, with no guarantee of personal reward, would you? The answers were not uniform. Some people said no. Some people were afraid. Some people were angry that the choice existed at all. Some people thought it was too much to ask. But most people, an unexpectedly large, genuinely moving majority of people, in Birmingham and London, and the small towns between and the places he visited briefly via Ethan's people's assistance in New York and Chicago and rural Kentucky and Edinburgh and Manchester. Most people said yes. Not heroically, not with speeches or declarations. Just the quiet, honest yes of someone who has thought about it genuinely and arrived at a real answer. Marcus filled half his notebook. On the evening of the 7th day, he was sitting in Hyde Park again. The same park. The same patch of grass where everything had begun. The ships were still above the city. The whole area was still cordoned off. But somehow the cordons had moved to allow him to be sitting here alone. Ethan appeared from nowhere, or perhaps from somewhere that simply existed at an angle to the space he occupied, and therefore felt like nowhere. She sat beside him on the grass. This was a thing that visibly shocked every person watching from the cordon perimeter. The alien queen of an ancient and incomprehensibly powerful civilization sat down on the damp October grass in Hyde Park next to a maintenance worker from Birmingham, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Marcus showed her his notebook. She held it carefully. She turned pages slowly. She read everything. After a long time, she said, "These are not the answers of a civilization negotiating for advantage." Marcus said, "No." She said, "These are the answers of people who understand what it means to choose." Marcus said, "Yes, because most of them have had to make that choice already, in smaller ways, and most of them chose right." He paused. He said, "That's what you saw from 300 years of watching, isn't it? Not that we're perfect, not that we're special, but that when it genuinely matters, enough of us choose right to make a difference." Ethan held the notebook and looked at the words inside it. She said, "Yes, that is exactly what we saw." Marcus said, "Then you already have your answer. You've had it this whole time." She looked at him. He said, "The answer is yes. Earth says yes." The agreement was not signed in a government building. It was not witnessed by heads of state or military commanders or the representatives of any formal institution. Several world leaders publicly objected to this. Several others publicly objected to those objections. The diplomatic cables that were exchanged in the 72 hours following Marcus's statement in Hyde Park were later described by historians as some of the most frantically confused official communications in recorded human history. Ethan did not engage with any of it. She said the agreement would be witnessed by those who represented the quality it was built upon. And she said Marcus would decide who those people were. Marcus chose 17 people. Edna from the Thursday class, a 16-year-old girl from Birmingham who had been running a food collection program for families in her area for 2 years. A retired schoolteacher from Edinburgh who had spent his post-retirement years driving elderly patients to hospital appointments because public transport in his area was inadequate and someone needed to do it. A volunteer firefighter from rural Kentucky who had run into a burning building 4 times in his career and described each time as simply what needed doing. A young doctor from London who had stayed at work for 40 hours straight during a crisis at his hospital because they were short-staffed and he would not leave his patients. A nurse from Manchester who had done the same thing 12 times in her career and considered it unremarkable. And 11 others like them, found through the network of conversations Marcus had conducted during his 7 days. Ordinary humans who had chosen the right thing quietly and consistently, and without recording it or presenting it or seeking recognition for it. They stood in Hyde Park in the golden light. Ethan spoke the terms of the agreement. Her people would share knowledge, not all at once, not as a download or a transfer, as a genuine exchange, earned and collaborative and growing over time. In return, human volunteers would come and learn and contribute to the maintenance of the boundary against the Creth. Genuinely, voluntarily. No compulsion. No coercion. Just choice. Then she did something that nobody had predicted. She turned to Marcus. She said, "There is one more term. One that is personal rather than civilizational. One that requires your specific consent." The watching world leaned inches. She said, "I am asking you to come with me. Not as a representative. Not as an official. As something there is not yet a word for in your language or mine. as the person whose nature most clearly matches the frequency we are trying to maintain, as the clearest example of what we hope to build this alliance around. The silence was absolute. She said, "I am asking this fully knowing you may say no. I am asking it because it is the right thing to ask, and I have learned from watching your people that the right thing should always be asked, even when the answer is uncertain." Marcus looked at her. He thought about his flat, his terrible alarm clock, his too-strong tea, his podcast about Birmingham canals, his Thursday evening class, his ordinary, unremarkable, quietly good life. He thought about Edna saying it's the same question people have always had to answer. He thought about freezing water in December and a stranger who nearly drowned. He said, "Can I still get tea? Wherever we're going." Ethan looked at him with those violet eyes. She said, "We will learn to make it." He said, "You'll need to make it very strong. Most people get it wrong." She said, "We will get it right." He said yes. And the world exhaled. 3 years passed. On Earth, things changed. Slowly at first, then with gathering speed in the way that real change always moves. Not like a switch being flipped, more like a tide coming inches. Steady, inevitable, transforming the shape of the shore. The knowledge the Varen shared arrived in pieces. Each piece required something in return. Not payment, effort, understanding, collaboration, real work between real people and real Varen, learning each other's ways of seeing and thinking and solving problems. It was not always easy. There were failures and frustrations and genuine disagreements. There were moments when the whole thing seemed close to falling apart from misunderstanding or fear, or old human habits of suspicion and self-protection. But it did not fall apart. Because the people at the center of it were not the most powerful people, or the most politically connected people, or the most strategically positioned people. They were the right people. The Varen had understood something very important. Not just about humans, about how genuine transformation works. It does not begin from the top. It does not flow from authority or mandate. It grows from the places where people are already doing the right thing because it is right. And it spreads from there in the way that real things spread. Organically, authentically, impossibly resistantly to cynicism or suppression, because it is rooted in something true. The Kreth were 11 years away when the alliance was formalized. By the time they reached the edge of the barrier zone, 9 years later, the boundary was stronger than it had been in centuries. Not because of weapons or strategies or superior technology. Because of the resonance. Because on one side of that boundary, 2 civilizations were holding it together. Not perfectly, not without difficulty, but genuinely, with the real energy of real choice made consistently over time. The Kreth reached the boundary. They pushed against it. It held. They pushed harder. It held. They moved along the edge, looking for weakness for 7 months. They found none. And then, in the way that consuming forces move when they encounter something they cannot consume, they turned and went elsewhere. Not permanently. The Varen were clear about that. This was not a permanent solution. Nothing in the universe was permanent except the principles that governed it. But it was a real solution for a real time. And it would need to be maintained and renewed and built upon by the generations that followed. Marcus was present when the Kreth turned. He was standing in a chamber aboard Ethan's ship that was designed to allow a view of the boundary in a form that human senses could process. It looked like the surface of an ocean lit from below. Vast and moving and impossibly beautiful. Deepening blues and golds that pulsed with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat in a way that made no scientific sense, and yet felt completely true. Ethan stood beside him. She had not stood in full armor for most of the last year. She still wore clothing of quality and authority. But the ceremonial weight of the full queen's armor seemed to belong to formal occasions now. When she was with Marcus, she wore something simpler. He noticed things about her that he had not expected to notice. That she moved very quietly. That she thought for a long time before she spoke, and meant every word when she did. That she found human music genuinely confusing, but was making a sincere effort to understand it. That she had developed an opinion about tea. That her opinion was wrong. That she refused to accept this. He had told her about the canal. The full story. Not the summary he had imagined when she referenced it, but the real thing. The cold of the water. The weight of the man he pulled out. The way he had walked home afterward and made a cup of tea and sat in his kitchen and felt the particular quiet satisfaction of having been where you were needed. She had listened to all of it. She said, "That is the frequency." He said, "What do you mean?" She said, "That feeling you described. That quiet satisfaction. That is exactly what powers the boundary. That specific sensation that comes after choosing rightly without reward. It is an energy. It is real. It is measurable. And it is the most powerful force we have ever found in the universe." Marcus had thought about that for a long time. He thought about all the humans he had spoken to in those 7 days. All the ordinary people with their ordinary stories of choosing right in quiet moments. Edna and her cup of terrible coffee. The 16-year-old girl collecting food for families. The volunteer firefighter who said it was just what needed doing. He thought about how many of those moments happened every day. Every single day on Earth. In hospitals and community centers, and on dark winter streets beside freezing canals. Millions of moments of chosen sacrifice that nobody recorded, and nobody celebrated, and nobody knew about. And he thought, it was always there. That energy was always there. We were always generating it. We just did not know it was a force that mattered beyond ourselves. Standing at the boundary window, watching the Creth turn away, Marcus felt Ethan's hand touch his arm briefly. Not a dramatic gesture. Not a declaration. Just a quiet acknowledgement of a shared moment between two people who had built something real across a distance that should have been uncrossable. He said, "What happens now?" She said, "Now we build it longer. Stronger. We teach others what we have learned together. And we wait. And when the time comes again, we hold." He said, "That sounds a lot like what ordinary people do." She said, "Yes, that is precisely the point." He looked at the boundary below them. That vast glowing ocean of held energy. The combined resonance of two civilizations choosing, consistently and genuinely, to protect something larger than themselves. He thought about Birmingham. About the morning it all began. About a bus he almost missed, and an alarm he hit snooze on twice, and a tea that was getting cold. He thought about how nothing about him had been chosen, because he was special in the way stories usually require their chosen people to be special. He had been chosen because he was consistent. Because consistency, it turned out, was the rarest and most powerful thing in the universe. And Marcus Webb, 37 years old, 3 years from home, standing at the edge of a boundary that held the darkness back from everything he had ever known, felt the same quiet satisfaction he had felt walking home along a winter canal. It was just what needed doing. So he had done it. Here is the part of the story that most people miss when they hear it for the first time. The Varen did not choose Earth because humans were the best. They chose Earth because humans were the most consistently good when nobody was watching. And that distinction changes everything about what the story means. Because most stories about chosen humans require the human to be extraordinary, to have powers or intelligence or destiny written in the stars, to be special in a way that separates them from everyone else. Marcus Webb was not separated from everyone else. He was the clearest example of everyone else. And that was the entire point. Ethan said it herself in a conversation that Marcus recorded in his notebook, and that was later shared widely. She said that in 300 years of watching Earth, her people had come to understand something that humans themselves had not fully articulated. That greatness on Earth was not the exception. It was the default, suppressed by circumstance and never measured properly. That the capacity for chosen sacrifice, the thing that resonated at the right frequency, was not rare among humans. It was common, almost universal, expressed in different ways by almost every human being at some point in their lives. The difference was only in who expressed it consistently, who made it a habit rather than an occasion. And the lesson was this: the boundary that held the darkness back was not held by heroes. It was held by consistent people, by the cumulative, ongoing, unremarkable-looking energy of people choosing right in quiet moments every single day without recognition or reward. Every one of those moments mattered. Every one added to the resonance. Every canal at midnight, every extra hour at a job that needed doing, every door held open, and every stranger helped, and every small, honest choice made when nobody was looking. It all mattered. It was all part of something larger. It always had been. Marcus sent one final message back to Earth from the boundary window. It was not an official statement. It was not a diplomatic communication. He sent it through a channel that Ethan's people had set up specifically for human-to-human communication. Just a short message. 17 words. He wrote, "Keep doing the right thing, even when nobody sees. Especially when nobody sees. It matters more than you know." That message was shared by more people than anything else connected to the entire extraordinary sequence of events. It was translated into every language on Earth. It was printed and posted and read and reread. Not because it was clever or eloquent or grand. Because it was true. And humans, when they encounter something true, know it in the same way they know a real thing from a copy. Immediately. In the body. In the place underneath words where real knowing lives. The opening hook asked, what did the alien queen do next that shocked every human alive? And the answer was not what anyone expected. She did not conquer. She did not demand. She did not use the overwhelming advantage. She held to take what she wanted from a civilization that could not stop her. She chose the most ordinary, extraordinary person she could find. She told him the truth. She asked rather than required. She sat on damp October grass and held a notebook full of handwritten answers from bus drivers and elderly women and teenage food collectors and retired teachers. She said please. And in doing so, she showed every human alive something they had forgotten or never fully believed. That the right way to deal with another civilization, with another person, with any other living being in the universe, was the same right way it had always been. With honesty, with respect, with the willingness to ask and hear the answer and honor it. If this opened your eyes to something real, something you can carry forward from this story, let it be that. The biggest things are held together by the smallest consistent choices. And yours count more than you realize. This story contained 3 things worth carrying with you. First, the most powerful force in this story was not the Varan ships or the alien queen or any technology beyond human understanding. It was the consistent, quiet, unrecorded goodness of ordinary people. That is where real power lives. Second, Marcus was not chosen because he was different from other humans. He was chosen because he was the clearest expression of what most humans already are when they are at their best. The story is not about one extraordinary person. It is about what all of us are capable of. Third, the boundary that held the darkness back was built from millions of small moments of real choice. Not grand gestures, Not dramatic sacrifices. Just consistent, honest, genuine choosing of the right thing over time. And that is available to every person watching this video right now. If this story hit something in you, something real, do one simple thing right now. Hit subscribe and turn on your notifications so you do not miss the next story from this channel. Because we are just getting started. Every week on HFY to CIFI, we bring you stories that do not just entertain you. They remind you of something true about what humans are and what we are capable of when we are at our best. And right now, if you want to go deeper, the next video is already waiting for you. It is another HFY story, and it will hit just as hard as this one. Click it now while the feeling from this story is still alive in you. We also have something building for this community that we are going to announce very soon. A place where people who love these stories can go deeper into them together. If you want to be the first to know, drop a comment below and tell us you are inches. And here is the question we want to leave you with today. Think about your own life. Think about a moment when you did the right thing when nobody was watching. When you helped someone or chose honesty or showed up for something that needed doing and you received nothing for it and told nobody about it. You have at least one moment like that. Maybe more than you remember. Drop it in the comments. Not to show off. Not to be praised. Just to add it to the record. To make it visible. To let it count in one more small way. Because those moments are the frequency. Those moments are the boundary. And they always have been. See you in the next one.